All right, if you would take your Bibles today and turn to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. I want to go to a very familiar story. I've just recently preached out of another gospel dealing with this same story, but I want to deal with something different today, and that is when Jesus, you know the story, when Jesus came walking on the water to his disciples who were out in that ship fighting that storm and battling that terrible storm. In Mark chapter 6, if you go toward the end of that chapter, verse 45, we come to this story. Now, remember that what has just happened was Jesus had just fed the 5,000 men. Now, we don't know how many he totally fed. We know it was 5,000 men. There was also women and children there, we're told. So we don't know how many women were there. We don't know how many children were there. But we do know that it tells us that he fed 5,000 men. Now, what the number was, it may have been double that, may have been triple that. We don't know how many he actually fed in that wonderful miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, but it may have been that he fed 10,000 or 15,000. But either way, it's an amazing miracle. And he's been doing that for day after day after day. He's tired. He needs some rest. He needs to go and just pray to the Father by himself. He needs to get away into his little prayer closet and get away from the crowds. He's had the crowds with him for about 3 days, and he's tired. And he needs to get away from everybody. So he tells his apostles, you remember the story, he told the apostles, get in the boat and go over to Bethesda, and you stay there and prepare the place for me to come. I'll be there tomorrow, but I need y'all to go and prepare the place and prepare for me to arrive and do the ministry that I'm going to do. So he sent his apostles away to get in the ship and go over along the coast, actually on the Sea of Galilee. They were to travel. They were going to travel at night, but it was not a difficult way to go because they were within sight of the land, and all along the coast there were houses and towns. As he went, they were going to make about a 7-mile journey up along the coast, the northern side of the Sea of Galilee. And at night when you travel, you could keep the coast to your left and you can see the coast from the boat. And so you can see the lights at night. You can see the lights from the cities and from the towns and from the little houses along the way. So there's no obstructions out there at night. So it would not have been a bad journey for them. They were going to sail, not row necessarily. They had the boat had a sail in it, so they were going to just go on up the coast to where the Lord told them to go. But God had another plan. God had a storm coming that they did not know about, and that's what the story's all about. And so let's look in verse 45. It says, and straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida, while he sent away the people. And when he had sent them away, he departed into the mountain to pray. And when even was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. And he saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he cometh unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit, and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them, and saith unto them, be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And he went up unto the into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. They had forgotten the power of the Lord. Their hearts had become hardened because they had been fighting a storm all night long. You know, when you go through hardships, when you go through difficulties, sometimes your heart can get hard if you're not careful. You can begin to doubt God. You can begin to doubt the power of prayer. You forget about sometimes what God has done in the past. When you're going through the darkest days, when you're going through the valleys, then that makes it easy for you to forget the power of God. You forget sometimes how God had intervened in your life. When you start going through the storm, and it battles you and it beats you down, you forget the goodness of God and how God had come to your aid over and over again. That's what they're saying here. In that battle that they fought, in that storm that they battled all night long, that had taken out of them the goodness of God. It had robbed them of their memory of how they had seen the Lord heal the sick and raise the dead and touch the lepers. They had forgotten all of these things because of the storm. Storms can do that in your life. Storms can take away things in your life. And I want to talk about this morning. When Jesus came walking, the title of my message, when Jesus came walking, you know, that's when we're in trouble, when we're going through the storm, when we're going through the hardship. Boy, that's when the Lord shows up. That's when the Lord will come to us. When you're going through the darkest days, that's when the Lord will come walking upon the water to you. And that's when he comes to us, when we are going through these hardships. And that's what these people are doing here. He had just fed them with the if you remember the story, with the little fish and the bread from the little boy's lunch. And he had just taken that and he had fed all of those thousands and thousands of people. And then all of a sudden, these men who had seen this miracle, they were a part of the miracle. They handed out the bread that kept coming out of that little bag. And I imagine they had to do double take sometime. What? And here comes more, and here comes more, and here comes more. And they're just looking like, where's all that coming from? They saw one of the great miracles, and they participated because they were handing it out. But yet they had forgotten that. How quick, it had just happened. And yet they had forgotten it. Why? Because they were in a storm. And I want to talk about that when you and I go through these things and the Lord shows up, and when he comes, and there's some wonderful lessons in this little story that I just read that I'd like to share with you. The apostles here in verse 45, I like that word. It says, and straightway he constrained his disciples. Now that word constrained, another definition that was used was compelled. But sometimes people even wonder, well, what does compelled mean? Well, listen, what all that word means was it was a forceful command. Get in the boat and go. Now, listen, it reminds me of something that's very important, that sometimes the Lord will pressure us to do his will. Sometimes the Lord will pressure us to do his will. Have you ever had to do something against your will? I think all of us have at some point in time. When I was a little boy, I didn't like cutting the grass. We didn't have a gas lawnmower back in the 50s when I was a little boy. we had one of those, and some of y'all know what I'm talking about, one of those old rotor lawnmowers, that wheel in front. The harder you pushed, the faster that thing would go. It only had 2 wheels, and it was solid wood, and it weighed a ton. And I was a little boy, and you'd get up there and you'd push, and those rotors would cut, and I didn't like that. But Daddy said it was building my strength. It was building me up. It was, because you couldn't pick it up unless you had some muscle in the first place. But you know what? I hated doing that. But my daddy had a way of explaining to me that I needed to. And so he would explain it in his way. Son, when I get home this afternoon, the grass better be cut. Son, it needs to get cut, and when I get home, I'll be home about 6 o'clock, and when I get home, it better be cut. Now, I knew what the results were going to be if I didn't get it cut. So I did. It was a forceful suggestion. That's what Jesus did. It wasn't, would you guys like to go? It's get in the boat and go. Get in the boat. And they were tired. They were just as tired as Christ. They had been going for 3 days also. They had not rested either. They would have liked to have stopped and slept all night, and they would have done. But Jesus said, no. Get in. You can rest when you get there. Get in the boat and go. Get over there and start preparing for me to come. Go and do it. It was a forceful suggestion. Listen, it reminds me of something that's important that Christians need to understand. God sometimes tells us to do things that we don't want to do. He pressures us into doing those things. You know what? God has told us the way that we need to live our life. God has told us how we are to do it and what we are to do and how we are to do things. And it's not a suggestion that if you would like to do it, it's a command from God. Do it this way. Live your life this way. Follow me. Do what I tell you to do, not what you want to do. All of us would like to live a life where we can just do what we want to do. But you know what? That's not what God would have us to do. God has a reason for us living our life His way and not our way. There's a lot of people out there that have lived their life their way, and it was not the way God wanted it, and it wound up in a mess, and it wound up in things that they could never take back. God has a way for us to live for our own good. God wants us to serve Him. We're going to spend an eternity with our Lord. And we need to live it while we're here on this earth God's way so that we can learn to serve Him and to do what He wants us to do for eternity. God tells us, and sometimes the Lord is going to pressure us into doing things that we don't want to do. But he says, do it. Because it's important for your life. It's important for what's going to happen in the future. Too many people have stepped out of the will of God and decided to do what they wanted to do rather than what God wanted to do, and they wound up paying a terrible price for it. Listen, God has way, and he may have to put some pressure on us. He may have to deal with us in ways. I've gotten out of the will of God. I know what I'm talking about. I've gotten out of the will of God before, and I've heard God knocking on my door. And God has beat me down to my knees before, to where I said, Lord, I don't want this to happen again. Lord, I need to get back. Listen, if God will do what it takes to bring us into His way of living, God will do what He has to do. He did it to His own people. The Jews paid dearly because they turned their back on God. Don't think that we're some special people that God's just going to turn His back and say, well, live your life any way you want to. It's not going to happen that way. God is going to bring us around one way or the other, and we may not see it right now, but there's a price to pay. And we need to learn that he's going to pressure us however he has to. He will bring us around to where we get back on our knees and begin to serve him the way we should. Listen, in verse 45, there's something else that I've learned here. And that's sometimes that the Lord sends us where we don't want to go. Sometimes the Lord's going to send us places where we don't want to go at all. You know, being a Christian is not necessarily fun sometimes. These guys were tired. They would have liked to have rest. But the Lord said, you know what? You can rest when you get to heaven. You've got a billion years of just rest. You can enjoy all that. But right now, while you're down here, you need to get busy doing what I want you to do. You've only got a short period of time. That these apostles didn't realize it, but they only had a few years to get all this done, because their lives were going to be cut short within a few years. They didn't realize that every one of them other than John, were going to die very soon after this. Every one of them was going to pay the price. We don't know how long we've got. Nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. We need to get busy doing what we can for the Lord while we're here. And you know what? Sometimes God wants us to get busy doing things that we don't want to do. I mean, there's times when we just need to do it God's way. When God tells us to go check on somebody, when God tells us to pick up the phone and call somebody, when God tells us to do this or do that, we may not want to do it. It's not a comfortable thing sometimes. But God didn't say, I want to make everything comfortable for you. I want to just make sure that that you're not put out of your busy schedule. You know what? God can take that busy schedule away just like that. He can say, I'll give you all the time that you need. I'll take it all away right now. And we tend to think that we don't have time for God. God can make a way where you'll have all the time in the world. God will get attention if he has to. We need to learn that sometimes God is going to expect us to do things that we don't want to do. Listen, nobody likes to get up on Sunday morning. Everybody says, oh, I need a day of rest. Well, you know what? You can have a day of rest on the day that God set aside. The day of rest that God set aside in the Bible was Saturday. That's the Sabbath. And that's the day that God said rest. What do we do on the day of rest? We're busy doing everything else so that we can rest on Sunday. No, Sunday's the first day of the week. And God said on the first day of the week, you'll come and worship me. You see, we do things that we don't want to do. But God said, listen, I didn't ask you whether you wanted to do it. I'm telling you, you are to do it. You're to serve me as long as you got breath. You're to serve me and do things as long as you're down here. And you know what? You can find all the excuses in the world, but it still doesn't take it away from the fact that God tells us to do these things. Sometimes God is going to tell us to do things that we don't want to do, but we are to do them anyway because God said so. And when we choose not to do what God tells us to do, then there's going to be a price to pay. Something else that I want to share with you in this little story that teaches us some valuable lessons in verse 48. Look in verse 48. It says, and he saw them toiling in rowing. Jesus saw them while they were out there in that storm, fighting that storm. Understand that when you think you're all alone, the Lord's always with you. When you think that you're out there battling this world all by yourself, when you think that nobody's around, nobody sees me, boy, I'm out here, I can get away with anything. Listen, he's watching. He knows what you're going through. He knows what you're facing. He knows what you're doing. And he knows all the excuses because he's heard every one of them. But one thing that I can tell you is that you're never alone. You're never alone. Sometimes people think that they're all alone and that nobody cares. Sometimes people think that listen, I'm just facing these storms. I'm facing adversity. I'm facing hardships, and nobody's with me. Nobody cares. Nobody will help me. Listen, the Lord sees everything that you're going through. You're not alone. The Lord's there. And He sees what you're facing, and He knows your heart, and He knows what you're going through. And we need to learn that whatever struggles we're going through, the Lord is right there with us every time. He sees everything, and He knows everything. I can also say that we can't get away with things that we think we can get away with. God has a way of letting us know that He's there, and He sees it, and He knows what you're doing. And he either approves or He disapproves, and He will bring about a way to change our life. God is in charge, and He sees everything that we do. Also in verse 48, I want to share with you something else. It says in verse 48, and He saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. And about the fourth watch of the night He cometh unto them, walking upon the sea. And He would have, as He would have passed by, He was looking at them and didn't see them. He actually saw them, but it was as He was going to just walk right past them. But listen, one thing I want to share with you is that when you're about to give up, just look out through the darkness. When you're about to give up, when the storm has about taken all that you can give, when you are at the point, and this is what God wants us to grasp out of this, is that when that storm has hit your life, and maybe you've never been through that storm yet, but at some point in time, we're going to face some storms that are going to bring us down to our knees. That's going to break us down to where we don't think, Lord, I can't take anymore. That's when you need to look out through the darkness, because there's a Lord that's coming your way. There's a God that's walking on that water, and He's coming to you because He will give you the strength to take one more hour, one more day. You know what? These men rowed all night long, and I would imagine it got to the point where they were not rowing for the daylight. They were rowing for the next minute. That water came crashing over. You see, it was pitch black dark. You ever been in a place where it was just so dark that walk into a room, close the door, a bathroom where there's no light, turn everything off, and hold your hand right in front of your face and see if you can see it? You can't. Without some kind of light, there's no reflection off the skin. It's pitch black dark. There was no light out there. There was no moon, there was no stars, there were no lights from the city. They were in a storm. There was no light generated anywhere. They were in total, absolute blackness. They could not see the waves coming, only feel them raise that boat. They could not see the waves crashing over the top of them. There was no light to reflect off of that. They never knew when the wave was coming down on top of them. And all night long they rode facing that, getting beat from side to side to side. What is that a picture of? That's what happens sometimes in our life. When you get beat from every side and every side and every side, and it beats you down. And you know what they were doing? They were rowing for the next minute. One more. Can I do it one more minute? Can I make it one more minute? And somebody was probably bailing as fast as they could bail. The water was pouring in. And those guys, there was no sail up. That wind was coming sideways. They had oars in the water trying to keep the boat upright. Those men were scared for their lives. And you know what? That'll happen to you at some point in time in your life. You'll get that news. You'll hear something That somebody will come to you, something. But that storm will come to you just like it will come to me. And we will battle for just another 60 seconds of life. We will battle to try to just stay on our knees another minute, another 5 minutes. It'll hurt so bad that we can't even stop the tears from flowing. Listen, that's when somebody looked out of that boat and they saw a vision coming across the water. You see, that when you're at the bottom of that wave and it's about to crash down, that's when God says, look out. Look out there. Because I'm coming. I'm coming to you. I'm coming to keep you afloat. I'm coming to keep that boat upright. I'm going to give you another 5 minutes, and you're going to wear those calluses off of your hands, and your hands are going to be bloody from rowing. But you know what? You're going to keep rowing. You're going to keep fighting. And 5 minutes is going to pass, and he says, I'm going to give you another 5 minutes. I'm going to give you enough. Why is God doing that? Because he's taken all of the pride that we've got out. He's removing all that we think we are from us. And he's bringing us to the point to where we realize I can't do it without him. And then he shows up. And he stops the storm. And he said, you learned it. You got the message. You see, you had not been on your knees the way you should. And now I want you to understand, I can take care of you. All of us are going to face those storms, folks. All of us are going to go through the hardships. God doesn't put us through it just to try to bring us to our knees, but so many times the storms are there to try to teach us lessons, to try to teach us that we need Jesus and we need to stay with Jesus. And he's the reason why the storms come, to just strengthen us and to help us to understand that with him we can get through. He will get us through. So when you're about to give up, just look out through the darkness. Listen, I want you to also understand something else in verse 48. In verse 48, I want you to see it says, and on the fourth watch, and about the fourth watch of the night, that he came to them. He had to leave them out there till the fourth watch. There's only 4 watches. There's only four watches. It starts at 6 p.m. and then it goes to 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and then 9 p.m. to midnight, and then midnight to 3 a.m. That's the first 3 watches. And then the fourth watch starts at 3 a.m. and goes to 6 a.m. 4 watches in the night. And the guards would take that term. You had the first watch, second watch, third watch, fourth watch. This was at the fourth watch after 3 a.m. in the morning. Remember, they left right at dusk. Jesus sent them out. It was almost dark, but he sent them out right at dusk. Now here it is after 3 a.m. in the morning. That's how long they've been out there. You see, here's something I want you to understand, that the Lord comes to us at his time, not our time. The Lord will come to you when he knows it's time to come, not our time. Well, my time would have been when it got cloudy. Soon it looks like it's going to rain. Lord, come, let's go. Let's get out of here. Time I heard thunder. It's time to get out of here, Lord. Come on, get me out. No. The Lord left them out there all night long. God comes at his timetable, not ours. The Lord's going to come to you, and the Lord's going to deal with you, and the Lord's going to help you when he sees that I've accomplished what I need to accomplish. Boy, if I could just get it right off the bat, maybe I wouldn't have to go through all that. If I could just figure out, Lord, what do you want me to do? What do you want to get out of me? Then maybe I won't have to go through that all-night storm. The apostles had to. But you know what? The Lord will come. He will make a way to where he arrives before you sink. He will arrive and he will do what he needs to do. But he's going to come at his time, not our time. And so we might as well, when we go through the storms of life, understand, Lord, I need you. Lord, please come. Lord, help me. And you keep praying. Remember, God says pray without ceasing. Lord, I'm not going to quit praying until you come. And I'm going to keep struggling. I'm going to keep rowing. And I'm going to keep praying until he comes. And when he knows that I've gotten all that I need, then he will come. But it'll be on his timetable, not mine. And God will come to you when you need to be rescued. But that's up to God. Listen, verse 51. In verse 51 it says, and he went up unto them into the ship. Now this is right after Peter had stepped out of the boat and walked on the water. Mark doesn't tell us anything about Peter. The reason is that in Matthew speaks to the Jews, and he shows Jesus as King of the Jews. Luke is a doctor, and Luke speaks to the world. He shows the man. He shows Jesus the man and what the man accomplished. And therefore, Peter being a man, it was important for us to understand what a man can do if they have faith. Mark writes Jesus as a servant. And man is not important. Jesus is the servant. Jesus is the one that suffers. Jesus is the one that goes through this. And so Mark doesn't bother with telling us about Peter because he's not interested in what Peter did. He's interested in showing Jesus and what Jesus did. And so he doesn't tell us about the story of Peter. So we come to verse 51, and it goes from Jesus arriving to Jesus entering into the boat. So that whole section about Peter, Mark doesn't tell us anything about that. But I want you to notice that it says, and he went up into the ship, and the wind ceased. I want you to understand that whatever we face, Christ is the answer. Whatever you go through, Christ is the answer. He will take care of everything. When he arrives, when you've been praying and you've been calling and you've been asking, when he arrives, he'll take care of it. He'll do everything that you need to take care of. Even when you do what God tells you to do, you're still going to face some storms, folks. You're still going to go through it. Why? Because God said that it rains on the just and the unjust. Everybody's going to go through it. But the difference is in the storms is that the people out there that do not believe in Jesus, they have no hope of somebody coming to them. But we do. I saw a picture that was on the internet that I was reading about this big march in London, England, of these Muslims that had taken over the city and closed off all the streets, and they were marching by the thousands, just as far as you could see, and they were all dressed in their Muslim garb. They were all marching, showing unity, that they were calling for Sharia law, and they were taking over the city. And there was a guy that was standing there with a sign, and it said, "Send your Jesus and we'll kill him again." And I thought, he is coming back. But I got news for you. You won't kill him. I got news for you. In your darkest hour, whatever you're going through, the most difficult thing, he is coming. He's coming back. He'll come to you. He's going to take care of it.